English. Yes, don't you? English, English. So anyway, there I was, and I became a stewardess for Pan Am, and I went. My first flight was to Bermuda, and as we landed, which was a spiral landing, and I flew DC-8s and 707s, and I threw up, and I thought, well, at least I'm not in Philadelphia. But I'm happy to be home now. But then all I wanted to do was get away. The running had began. So for 2 years I threw up and lost all this weight too, so that I weighed 108. Like in this picture, New York Magazine, this is what I looked like. Pretty emaciated. So I got a medical leave of absence from Pan Am, and passengers said, well, you know, you should model, you have pretty eyes. So I thought, well, I'll try in Paris. If in 2 months I don't get hired, I will go back to flying. So I was still a Pan Am stewardess when I began working, and this was my first modeling assignment after 2 months. And then I eventually worked for French Vogue. So I was very proud of that, and went home. I don't like France too much. I like America. I miss the cheeseburger, so I wanted to go home. Get me out of here. So I go back to New York, and I meet Eileen Ford. If any of you remember her name, she was a big model agency, and she looked at my pictures, and she said, lovely darling, why didn't you stay there? And that's not what I wanted to hear. So she signed me up, and sure enough, a couple months later, she fired me. I thought, that's not right. So that's what the point of this catastrophic, I didn't give up, you see. So I went on to become a supermodel, and these are some of the covers I did. I went to another agency called Stewart, and went on to have a very successful career. I did a lot of covers. I also did a lot of ads, and ads were where the money was. So then I met my ex-husband, and we married. And I loved him and loved all the famous people we'd meet. And one day we were at a party. You remember Diane Furstenberg? Well, she was a princess at one point. And she was Princess Diane Furstenberg, and she had a party at the Hippopotamus. So we went, and some man came up and said, would you like to dance? And I said, sure. He said, I'm Claude Picasso. And I thought, oh dear. So here's Claude, and I fell in love on the dance floor of Hippopotamus with Claude Picasso. He's number 5. I've given the men numbers because I forget some. I don't want to miss any, and I forget their names sometimes. But number 5 was Claude. Look at the long hair. Wasn't he handsome? So he was Pablo Picasso's son. So we danced away, and he went back to his wife, and I went back to my husband. Then sure enough, a few months later, I'm going to acting class. I studied acting with Wynn Hanman in New York with classmates like Richard Gere and Brad Pitt. Not Brad Pitt, what was Davis. And there I was on the way to acting class, and this man comes up, and he says, hi. And I said, hi, it's Mrs. Ronald Mallory, but I've always had trouble with my identity, so I was not married anymore. I said, I'm divorced. He said, I know, so am I. Do you want to have dinner? So we made a date for dinner, and he brought a dozen daisies, and he didn't leave my home. Then we were together for about 4 or 5 years. Actually, it lasted 9. So now, I became, modeling helped to, what do you say, objectify me. I needed work, and it was the 70s, and I was very proud of what I had accomplished, but still, I had become an object for men. I did a lot of ads for products, and I became the object of a man's desire. So, in any event, he said, I have to go to Paris, and he's staying with his mother. His mother had a lot of money. He didn't, and I was supporting him from the money I had from modeling. He said, I'm going to Paris. And he didn't invite me. I thought, well, I'm not your hotel, I said to him. So he said, I'll be back shortly. So he goes off, Meanwhile, I'm on the covers of Cosmopolitan, Newsweek, and New York Magazine, all in the same month. And I went to Saturday Night Live, and a man called Buck Henry introduced me to a man named Mike Nichols. Remember him? He was married to whom?
Oh, the news woman. I can't think of her name.
Diane Sawyer.
Diane
Yeah.
Sawyer.
And he was lovely. So do you know any movies he did?
No.
The Graduate was probably the big one. In any event, I went out with Mike, and we had several dinners, and I liked him because first he listened to me. He asked my opinion about things, and I had a sense I was valued. I didn't feel like an object with Mike at all. It was wonderful. So he said, "Do you want to go?" One night he said, "Do you want to go to Jackie Onassis is a friend of mine, and she's having an anniversary with Harry at El Morocco. I want to know if you want to come." And I said, "Well, sure." So we make the date, and as he pulls up, who should return from Paris but Claude? So now I've got Claude here and Mike at the door. So I said, "I'm not giving this date up, because you should have called." So he goes into the bedroom, and in the event, I go off to the anniversary, and I meet, here's a picture of Mike and I were photographed for Life magazine. That's that's Jackie, and there's an article about it. It was in Vanity Fair. But she was absolutely lovely, as you can imagine. She was very tall, probably 6 feet. And when she met you, her eyes were piercing. She just took you right in. And no, total focus. And she curtsied almost when she was introduced to me, and we shook hands. And then Mike whispered in her ear. And it was very sweet because I thought they had something personal was happening between them. I don't know what it was. But she had suffered so much, I wanted her to have happiness. And she was happy to see Mike. So anyway, afterwards we go off to Mike's apartment in the Beresford, and Jack Nicholson joins us. Anybody remember Jack Nicholson? Yes, and yeah. So then Claude and I make up, and after that, in April, I think it's 8th, the phone rings, and it's the New York Times, and they say to Claude, "Your father's dead." And he said, "Married, married, married." Anybody know what married is? No. Well, it's a swear word. So in any event, his father was dead. He said, "I always knew that this would happen over the phone, that I would be told of his death, because Claude had been exiled from Pablo Picasso's life." Picasso, his last words about Claude were, "I wish you were dead," according to The Guardian. His mother was Françoise Gillot, and she never married Picasso. So they were illegitimate children, and they didn't get on with the wife of Picasso. So he died. We had to find the body. So we got on the plane the next morning, went off to Marseille, and we stayed with a woman named Maya, who was his half-sister. So then we drove into Vauvenargues. Now, Vauvenargues is a castle, Chateau de Vauvenargues. It's surrounded by a moat. It was a dried-up moat, and it had graveyards in it with dirt by each graveyard. So they asked me, I was with Maya, Paloma, Maya's husband, and Claude, "What do we do now?" I said, "Well, you run your fingers through the soil, and whatever's the most moist soil will be his." It seemed logical. This is in the moonlight out of this castle. Well, it was totally ridiculous. There we are, all feeling this dirt. We couldn't figure it out. So finally, they said, "Let's go into X and we'll buy a cardboard shirt." They got from a dry cleaner a piece of cardboard, you put in shirts, and they wrote, "To our father whom we've loved and will love for the rest of our life." So then we went back to the gravesite, and Paloma says, "Now what do we do with this?" I said, "Oh, put it on any grave. He's dead. It doesn't matter." So they listened to me, and they put it on a grave, and then we stood around the grave and held hands and said the Lord's Prayer. And then Claude afterwards asked me to be his wife, and I said, "Would you like?" Of course. I was thrilled. So after we left Vauvenargues, which was through a winding road, the press was all around us, and they were all in the back hiding because they didn't want the press to see them because they weren't wanted by the wife of Picasso. So I yelled at the press, look on the grave, you'll see a note from the children. Well, I looked in the papers the next day, they never saw the note, but you all have heard about that. In any event, a month or so later, we found out that Picasso had been buried, and you know what a crypt is outside of the castle? It was buried outside, not in the graveyards at all. And Jacqueline, his wife, eventually hung herself in the medieval castle. So after that, Francois Gillot, now Picasso's estate is up for grabs. He didn't believe in a will. He didn't like Claude. So what does Francois Gillot do but sues the French government for Pablo Picasso's estate? And wouldn't you know, she won. So when she won, I was doing plays, remember Bucks County down here, I was doing Imagine Picnic, and we got a letter that he won, and we were all thrilled because he had no money, even though she had it, she wasn't giving him money. And so we all went off to Paris, and I was told to bring Charmin. Now in these days, in 74, the French toilet paper was individual brown sheets. It wasn't white long, you know, you remember those?
Yeah. And when you traveled, you had to put the toilet paper in the shoe and put it in the suitcase and take it with you.
Yeah.
But, you know, like small rolls.
So I was to bring the Charmin to celebrate winning the lawsuit, and we decorated the banister of her townhouse in toilet paper, all 3 stories. And she had now married a man called Jonas Salk. Do you all remember Jonas? Sure you do. He invented the polio vaccine, the Salk vaccine. And he was going to be my father-in-law, and he was a very, very nice man. So the thing about Jonas is he killed animals for experiments. His brother was a vet. They didn't get on Herman. And his other brother was a child psychiatrist. So they had children, animals, and polio. Interesting family. But Jonas was a really nice man. So now Francois, somewhere in these years, she knew I was paying for Claude, so she wanted to show her gratitude, and she gave me 3 pieces of Picasso jewelry. And I was very grateful. So one was Claude's portrait. So anyway, now Claude is going to be a millionaire, and we get an apartment in New York on the 36th floor of something called the Sovereign in Sutton Place. Our neighbor was Calvin Klein, the same elevator. We got 11 rooms in Paris on something called the Rue de Bac in Saint-Germain. And I had to go back to New York to tend to affairs, and my agent called and said, a director wants to see you for a movie called Stepford Wives. So I said, I'm not auditioning, I'll meet him, but that's it. I met him, and he booked me right away on the meeting. I had a commercial running for about 10 years. I don't know if any of you remember it, but it was all my men wear English leather or they wear nothing at all. So he booked me, and I filmed it, and this is a picture of, I'm the